Hello everybody, my name is Colin Klein. I'm a biology major, and today, for my international relations topic, I'm going to be talking about the issues of human trafficking. Now, the reason why I'm talking about human trafficking is because it's a major issue that's not often talked about, and very few people know how serious it is, and how often it occurs. And the reason why it affects international relations is because it's a major human rights violation, which affects millions of people worldwide, and many people are suffering violence and trauma from it. And without further ado, let's begin. So first of all, it's important to clarify what human trafficking is. So human trafficking is the illegal trade and exploitation of human beings through means of force, fraud, or coercion. And in other words, it's modern slavery. And this, and there are many practices of human trafficking. Number one is forced labor, which is where people are forced to work against their will. Sexual exploitation, where victims are forced to engage in sexual acts. Forced marriage, where victims are forced to marry another person without giving consent. And some children are forced to be soldiers to fight in wars. It's also important to talk about the statistics of human trafficking. First of all, human trafficking is the fastest growing business of crime in the world, along with drug trafficking and illegal arms trade. It is an industry that profits $150 billion a year. Around 1 million people are trafficked every year globally. About 49.6 million people are currently in modern slavery. 54% of people trafficked are women and young girls. About 27% are children as a whole. And about 80% of the cases involves some kind of sexual abuse. Throughout the world, human trafficking has a tier system, which ranks countries based on efforts made to prosecute traffickers, protect victims, and prevent human trafficking. And it goes by 3 tiers. Tier number 1 is the highest ranking, and it indicates the highest efforts of trafficking prevention. Tier 2 indicates significant efforts but not full elimination. And Tier 3 is the lowest ranking, with little to no efforts of prevention or protection of victims. It's also important to mention where human trafficking happens the most in the world. Well, it usually happens in countries that are poor, that have a lack of food and water, or have a corrupt or lack of government system, or have a lack of law enforcement personnel. Some examples include these 3 countries here: Afghanistan, Belarus, and Libya, which are all Tier 3 countries according to the human trafficking tier system. So, let's talk about Afghanistan. So ever since the Taliban took over the country in 2021, human rights abuse and human trafficking have increased. And much of the human rights abuse have affected women the most. And women usually get no rights in Afghanistan. They have been denied the freedom of speech, education, employment, and political participation. Women are often arrested or even killed for not having a hijab on, and some are killed to prevent women from fleeing abusive situations as punishment under the Taliban's moral laws, quote unquote. Also, children are forced to do manual labor within the country, such as brick making, carpet making, harvesting, and salt mining. Some children are forced to transport and smuggle drugs such as opium. And the Taliban is no stranger to recruiting children as soldiers through means of coercion, fraud, and false promises. And sexual slavery has also been rampant within Afghanistan. And the Taliban has implemented practices such as bachabazi, which is in Arabic means boy play, and is a practice where adolescent boys are forced to dance for entertainment purposes or used for sexual favors. And forced marriage is also common in Afghanistan as human trafficking. And the Afghan government didn't really do much to prevent human trafficking. Plus, they had been overthrown by the Taliban, which has been involved in human trafficking. Belarus is another country where human trafficking occurs most frequently, but it's often covered up from the general public. So, reports from the State Department say that the authorities of labor therapy centers make their patients go through forced labor. And according to some other reports, the Belarusian government planned to increase the number of labor therapy centers as of this year in 2024. And the authorities in Belarus have transferred Ukrainian children within their country. And the Belarusian government didn't really do much to combat human trafficking, but they did some efforts to address it. One example of how they addressed it was supporting a safe labor migration awareness raising campaign. Last is Libya. Libya is highly vulnerable to human trafficking because of its civil unrest, political corruption, and lack of government. The reason for Libya's unstable government is because of a civil war that broke out in the 2010s. Within the country, armed militant groups are responsible for extreme violence and human rights abuse on its citizens, such as forcible recruitment of soldiers, forced labor, and sex trafficking. And migrants are the most vulnerable to human trafficking, and they are often captured and taken to detention centers where they undergo many tortures, such as physical and sexual abuse at the hands of their captors. And some traffickers even demand a ransom from the victims' families as well. And Libya's government could do very little to combat human trafficking due to its lack of law enforcement personnel. But the United Nations, however, were able to combat human trafficking by making refugee camps in Niger to save victims from human trafficking in Libya. And lastly, here are some measures that we can take to prevent human trafficking. Number one is to raise awareness to everyone that you know and to protect your children at all costs. Number two is to encourage policy change and to use your voice to spark needed changes at a local, national, or international level, and to vote for policies that will help protect victims of human trafficking, support survivors, and bring more predators to justice. A third way is to monitor supply chains because some businesses will use forced labor to make a greater profit on their products. So be careful of what products you're buying and uh, and where they came from and how they were made before buying. Number four is to support anti-trafficking national government organizations. And last is to contact the authorities if you see any signs of human trafficking of anybody in your neighborhood or if it's somebody that you love. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and hopefully it it taught you more about human trafficking and how it affects international relations. And anyway, I hope you have a good day and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody.